Wake up everyone, I'm Sleepy, and today I'm bringing you a no-nonsense video tutorial on how to customize your DayZ server. This will include how to download and install mods onto your server, as well as to dig into the files for customization. By the end of this tutorial, you should have a good grasp on how to do this yourself. And with that said, let's dive right in. Alright, so the first thing we're going to need to do is locate our server files. And if you follow the video that was released alongside this one, your files should be in the same location as mine. If not, you're going to need to locate these and open them up. Ours are here on our desktop. Inside this folder is where we're going to download and install our mods. And to start that process, we're going to need to open up Steam and go to the workshop. So if we open up Steam, we can find DayZ, and then we can click on the workshop button. And in this search bar, you can type in Sleepy's Medical. And this is the mod I've created. And we click on this right here. And then all we need to do to download this mod is hit the subscribe button. Once it's finished downloading, we can exit out of here. And we need to locate this file. And we can do this one of a couple of ways. The way we'll do it today is by using the launcher. So open up the launcher. We'll go to our mod section. And we'll scroll down to find Sleepy's Medical. And you may not need to scroll down. Sleepy's Medical may be the only mod populated in this list. Either way, it should be there. We'll right click and open folder. This is a warning saying that if we make any changes to this file, it could break the file, but we understand this and we are going to make a copy of it. So we'll hit I understand, and we will copy this folder. Now we can exit out of here and exit out of here. Back in the root directory of our DayZ server, we're going to paste this file. Control V. And now we have the mods files on our server. Let's take a look inside of Sleepy's Medical and see what's going on. So we've got an add-ons folder, a key folder, and a types folder. Inside the add-ons folder, just like our server, has PBOs and buy signs. There's signatures. And we have a key that will unlock those signatures. We also have created a types file. Now this is something I have added for my mod in order to spawn the items that I created into the loot pool. And we can come back to this later. Now that we have the mod installed on our server, we need a way for our server to read this. Because by default, the server doesn't know that this file exists. We have to add it into our launch parameters. So we need to open up our server bat. We can use Visual Studio Code, and that's what I recommend. And if we drag and drop this server bat into the program, we can edit it. In this line right here, our start sequence will also contain all of our launch parameters. If you notice here, there's a section dedicated to mods. So what we add into this value is the name of our mod file. And so I will copy this name over and paste it into that value. I'll also trail this with a semicolon. This just denotes that it's the end of that name. And that's it. We'll control save and exit out of this. Now when our server launches, it will consider this file when launching. There's still one more step we need to take. We have to unlock the signatures. And we do that by using the key that I provided. Control C this key so we can copy it into a keys folder on the root of our server directory. We'll open this folder and we'll paste it in. And that's it. You have successfully downloaded and installed a mod onto your server. To update our mod, we're going to need to download the latest version of our mod. In order to do that, we're going to open up our launcher. If we go to our mod section, we can select the mod we want to download. If we hit these three dots here, we can then hit repair. And this will download the latest version. Once it's ready, we just need to copy these files over. So let's open this folder. Yes, we understand and we are not making any changes. We simply just want to copy this folder over. exit out of here, and exit out of here. And back in our root directory, we can copy this over. Control V. And yes, we want to replace the files in this destination. Some mods may require you to start the server in order for them to populate a configuration file. Most of the time, these configuration files will be put into our profiles folder. And some mods may also add items that will go into the loot pool. And so these mod developers will add a types file. And the types file is basically a file that allows us to adjust the loot pool. That's a perfect segue into our next subject, which is customizing our DayZ files. Let's take a look. Back in the root of our server directory, we need to locate our missions folder. And then we decide on which mission we would like to customize. This is for Chernarus, for Livonia, and for the new maps call. And today we're going to be customizing Chernarus. These are all the files and folders that we can customize in order to make our server the way we want. First, we're going to take a look at the types file that we mentioned just a second ago. So we'll go inside of our DB folder, and we will open up our types.xml. And we'll use Visual Studio to do this. Now, inside of this file contains all of the items that spawn in the world. And it also gives it values that you can change. We're going to step through each of these so you understand what they do. Each type is going to come with an opening and closing tag. Inside our opening tag, we will have the class name of the item that we want to assign value to. The first value is nominal. This is how many the server wants to spawn in. This next value is lifetime. This is how long before the item despawns. This next one, restock timer. This is how long before we restock another one after we have reached this minimum. The quant min and quant max determines that if this is a container, how full should that container be. For example, if this was a water bottle, this would determine how much water comes inside. We're going to move past cost as I have not received a clear enough explanation to understand what this is doing. Next, we're going to check if there are already items in the world. So first check we're going to do is cargo check. Is this item inside of a vehicle? Next, hoarder check. Is this item inside of stashes, like barrels, tents, etc.? Count and map is this item already on the map? And count and player is this item in a player's inventory? And when we count these are the checks we're going to put in place in order to know whether or not we are at the nominal and minimum values. Then we have our crafted. This means that this item is created using a crafting recipe. And DE loot means this is dynamic event loot. It spawns on helicopters and convoys. If it is set to 1 in this value, it will not spawn anywhere else in the world. Otherwise, we're going to need to tell it where to spawn. And that's what these categories and usage and values are for. The category is the type of item that it is. And even though this is an attachment, we are going to consider it a weapon. This allows us to place it inside buildings where weapons spawn. And we can determine which buildings we want to spawn in. In this case, our military and police locations. And then we take on the tier system, which determines how far away from the player spawn this is, with tier 1 being the closest to the player spawn, and tier 4 being the furthest away. So basically what each type is saying is that this item wants to spawn this many, but it needs to spawn this many. If we go below the minimum, we need to start the restock timer. After the restock timer hits 0, we'll spawn 1 into the world. Once it's in the world, we'll start the lifetime. So after 1400 seconds, we'll despawn this item. And we can reset this timer if we interact with the item. We can also determine the quant min and quant max. And this says, if this is a container, how full should the container be? And then we can apply our flags. So if this is dynamic event loot, it will not spawn anywhere else in the world. Otherwise, we're going to count how many are in the world. We'll count in cargo, We'll count in hoarder, we'll count on the map, we'll count in player, and then we can determine the location. We can determine the location by determining what type of item this is, what type of location we want it to spawn in, and what tier we want to spawn in. So this says that we will spawn this item in locations where weapons can spawn. It will also spawn in military locations or police locations, but those military and police locations must be located in tier 3 or tier 4. And that's how we place items on the map. Back inside our DB folder, let's take a look at our economy.xml. I'm gonna open this with Visual Studio. Now, we have different root classes. So this dynamic, animals, zombies, these are root classes. And it's telling these root classes what they should do. And init means initialize. So when the server starts, should this item be initialized? This next line, load, is when the server starts, should this item's information be loaded from storage? And that is basically allowing us to put things back where they were before the reset. The respawn is whether this class should respawn once its minimum values have been met. And then save will mean that this item's information will be saved to our storage so that next time we load the server, we will load this information. The next file we're going to take a look at is our globals.xml. The animal max count is how many animals should spawn on the server. This does not include ambient animals. Cleanup avoidance means how far away from the player before the item can be deleted. Cleanup lifetimes for dead animals, players, and zombies. And if an item has not received a cleanup lifetime, it will receive this one. Cleanup lifetime limit means that in a single cleanup, it can only clean up a maximum of 50 items. Cleanup lifetime ruin means that if loot is ruined, this is the lifetime before it's deleted. Flag refresh frequency means that this is how long your flag can last, and this is how long your flag refreshes your items for. Food decay, whether or not we should allow the food to decay. And these are server processes related to idle mode and startup. Initial spawn means how much loot will be spawned on a server upon the initial start. Loot damage min and max, how much damage should be applied to the loot. Loot proximity placement allows dispatch containers to receive loot. Loot spawn avoidance, controlling how far away a player should be from a loot group for that loot to spawn inside of. These are various ways to handle our respawn and our spawn initial. How many initial tests are allowed for item spawn. Time hopping is related to official servers, as well as the time penalty. Time log in and log out. The world wet temp update means should we update the temperatures and wetness modifiers for all items in the world. The maximum number of zombies and the maximum zone spawn distance. The next file we're going to look at is our messages.xml. And Bohemia has left pretty good comments in order to tell us what we're doing here. But basically this is just displaying messages to the players. So if you just read through this document, you'll be able to figure out how these messages work. Moving on to our events.xml. Inside of this file is most of what we need to spawn an event. And I say most because this file is dependent on another file called our event spawner. And that file determines where these events can spawn. And we'll come back to that file later on. We already know what these values do because we touched on these inside of our types file. The safe radius is going to be how far away from the player this event can spawn. The distance radius is how far away from another event this can spawn. And the cleanup radius is how far away from the player before it can be cleaned up. Then we can apply flags such as, is this deletable? Do we initialize this randomly? And do we remove damage from it? And then we can focus on a position. Positions are fixed and player. Player means that when a player enters this area, that this event will spawn. Fixed means that this event will spawn upon all of these conditions. Then we move down to our limit. And this is determining how our children will be distributed. Inside of this list is a list of children that, if mixed, will mix up all of the children in this list in order to meet these values. And then we have child, and that means that we will spawn each child inside of this list. And then we have our active. This means whether or not this event is active, 1 being yes, 0 being no. Then we can determine our children. And each children comes with the child's class name, the min-max for the event, and the loot min-max for the event. And the loot min-max is going to be related to things like helicopter crashes where loot can spawn on. This will determine how many items can spawn on that event. And that covers everything inside of our DB folder. So if we move back up, we can dive into the ENV folder. Inside of here are all the territories for our zombies and animals. If we open up one of these, we can see what's inside of it. This territory color is basically a visual representation of the territory. And this plugs into our area maps to kind of give a representation of where these territories are. And inside of this territory, we can assign the positioning and the radius. And so this position says this is able to be grazed by the bear, and that this is the radius that the bear can go inside of that position. And so this kind of determines where our animals can roam around. The next folder, the storage_1 folder, holds all of the persistent information needed when the server starts. This allows the placement of the objects that were in the world before the server restart. So essentially this saves all of the information and allows it to be reloaded once the server starts. If you wanted to wipe your server, you would delete this folder, and your server would have nothing to read and would repopulate this folder with a fresh build. The area flags map is where we can look at the visual representation of the areas in the game, such as the territories and the tiers. If we open up our CFG economy core, we see that we are assigning our root classes. And a root class is basically the class's parent, and it needs to inherit from these classes. So for instance, in order for a canteen to even exist, it needs to inherit all of the information from this inventory base. You won't need to really make changes on this file, so we'll just move on from here. Next we have our CFG effect area. If we open this up, this will contain all the information for our static gas zones. So like the gas zone in Pavlovo Military or at Riffy. So we assign it a name, trigger type, and all of the data it needs to spawn. And you can add or subtract these gas zones. You can put them in different places and things like that. These safe positions are where this gas zone will spawn you if you log out inside of the gas zone. Moving on, we have our CFG environment. If we open this, we'll see all the information that is needed to plug in our territories and the behavior that our animals will receive. Most of the time you won't need to change anything here, so we'll move on. Next one is our CFG event groups. And this is going to have to do with our static trains and convoys. These are different to our events because they spawn other items on the events themselves. And so each time an event will spawn, it will say it needs to spawn these items on that event. And it gives all the information that we need. Does it spawn dynamic event loot? What is the minimum and the maximum of the loot that can spawn? And what are the positions inside of this item that these items can spawn? And this is how we set up our trains and convoys. Moving on, we have our event spawns. Inside of this folder is all of the locations that our events can spawn. So all of the locations that our vehicle civilian sedan can spawn. This is a x-axis, z-axis, and a rotation. This rotation will be 0 pointing north and 360 degrees pointing north as well. The next file we'll take a look at is our CFG gameplay. This file, in my opinion, has the largest impact on the player experience. You can customize a lot of things in here. Should we disable base damage, container damage, such as tents and barrels? Should we disable the respawn dialog, meaning when you click respawn, should you be greeted with a custom or random respawn option? Should we allow the player to respawn while they're unconscious? Under player data, should we disable the personal light? That's the light attached to the player. And we can set the player's stamina. When we have different modifiers, sprinting while we are erect, while we are crouched, while we are swimming, while we are climbing a ladder, while we are performing a melee attack, while we're traversing obstacles such as fences and walls, and while we're holding our breath. This is the lowest that your stamina can reach. This is the maximum. We then have a kilogram to stamina ratio, which determines how much weight is or how much stamina is reduced by the amount of weight. Shock handling. How fast should we refill our shock while we were conscious, while we were unconscious, and should we use these modifiers? Our movement data controls our inertia. To disable inertia, you can just set this to false. Otherwise, you can adjust the values. Time to strafe is the time it takes to move side to side while you're jogging. Your rotation speed is how long it takes for you to rotate your character. The time it takes to sprint. The time it takes to move side to side while you're sprinting. And your rotation speed while you're sprinting. Drowning data. We lose stamina. We lose health. We lose shock. Under worlds data, we have a lighting config. 0 meaning lighter nights, 1 meaning darker nights. This object spawner array takes in file names that our server will read in order to distribute buildings that we placed. Environmental temps. There's 1 temp for each month of the year. The lower the temperature, the cooler the world. The higher the temperature, the warmer the world. Our wetness modifier determines how much weight is increased by the amount of wetness applied. Our base building data allows us to allow players to build anywhere. This will disable checks while we are using our hologram, and this will disable checks while we are actually constructing. We can also change the way our hit indicators work, as well as our map data. If we ignore map ownership, we can allow the player to use the map even if they do not have one in their inventory. If we ignore nav item ownership, it means while we are using the map, We do not need compasses or GPSs in order to get the helpful icons. Should we display the player's position on the map? And should we use this in nav info? And that covers our CFG gameplay. Next in our list, we have our CFG ignore list.xml. So if we open this up, inside of this file is anything we want to ignore. So for instance, if we want to ignore the class name bandage, then anywhere in our files where the class name bandage is located, it will ignore and all of the values related to that bandage. And so basically if we want to ignore an item, we'll place it in this list. Moving on, we have our limits definition. Inside of this, we'll be able to determine our categories, our tags, the usages, and the values for all of our items. So we can add to any of these sections. And that way we can determine specifically where we want certain items to spawn. Our CFG limits definition user will further refine the definitions of our loot so we can more specifically place our loot in a certain location. Moving on to our CFG player spawn points. Inside of this file, we can determine where our player spawns. Each of the spawn groups, like West Cherno, will have a lifetime, 240 seconds. And if your character spawns while this group is active, it will choose one of these locations. And then every 240 seconds, it will switch to a new group. And this is how you distribute your players. Moving on, we have CFG random presets. Let's take a look inside here. Inside of this file, we can see our random presets. And the way our random presets work is we can assign these names to other items that have containers. And so if a jacket, for instance, is assigned Food Village, it will have this chance to spawn these items. And the way this chance works is 1 would equal 100%, and in this case 0.16 will equal 16%. And then inside of here, all of our items will have another chance. And the higher the chance here, the more likely it is to spawn that item. And this way we can distribute loot inside of containers randomly. Moving on, we can take a look at our CFG spawnable types. Inside of this file, all of the types will have certain information we can change, such as the damage applied to this item when it spawns, the attachments that this item will spawn, as well as the random presets that we defined in the previous file. And this will assign loot to all of our containers, as well as zombies, and our weapon attachments. For instance, this FNX 45 has a 10% chance to spawn a 15-round mag. It has a 20% chance to spawn a pistol suppressor, a 10% chance to spawn a flashlight, and a 15% chance to spawn this optic. That way we can define when our items spawn into the world, what they come attached with. The next file in our list, the CFG underground triggers, is how we determine a lighting effect inside the world. Inside Chernarus, this file will be empty. This is only used for the bunker in Livonia, I believe, as well as a bunker in the new Sakal map. I won't touch on this file as I do not fully understand it, as I have not been able to get these underground triggers to work. So let's move on to our CFG weather. Inside of this file, you'll find everything you need to set up the weather. We can change overcast, fog, rain, wind magnitude and direction, and snowfall. And the way this works is This is the amount of overcast we want. This is how long it takes to change from this condition to another condition. And this is how long this condition will stay. And these are just setting limits to those conditions. And you can change this for each one. So for instance, if you wanted to make it snow in Chinaris, you would change the actual amount, the time, and how long it will stay. The next file on our list is our init.c. This is our initializer file. This file is more advanced than the rest because this file is written in DayZ's enforced scripting language. The purpose of this file is to initialize our mission, as well as to override any functions like our starting setup in order to specify what we want the character to start with. There are a ton of options for this file, but the only way to know what those options are is to understand DayZ's enforced scripting language. And that will be the topic of another video in the future. Moving on. These next few files will be related to our fruit spawns. Inside this first one, we will be exporting all of the models that are needed and then determining the positions on these models that our fruits will spawn. So for instance, this canina bush has an area around it that can spawn those trajectory caninas, and this will determine where around that bush they will spawn. On to the next file. These will all be related to where in the world our trees and bushes will spawn. This map group dirt is an empty file likely used on another map. The next file on our list, map group pos, determines the position of all of the buildings in our world. For instance, this building here will be located at this position. Its roll, pitch, and yaw will be equal to these values here, and its rotation would be equal to this value. And this will determine where in the world the buildings are in order for us to spawn gear inside of them. On to the next file, we can further define these buildings. For example, this land shed M1 has a usage of either industrial or farm, which means only industrial and farm items can spawn in here. Its container that has a maximum of 2 items able to spawn. Those items can be tools or containers, and they can be tagged for the ground or floor. And these are the points inside of this building that those items can spawn. And that's basically how we determine what loot will go into each building. And that covers all of the files that we can customize for our server. By now you should have a good grasp on how to download and install mods onto your server, as well as customize these files. We will be adding more tutorials in the future to go over more subjects, so if you subscribe you'll get access to those notifications. But for now, I'm sleepy and it's time to take a nap.